It has officially been 1 year since I acknowledged that I have ADHD, since I was diagnosed with ADHD. And it has been one of the most objectively useful acknowledgments that I've ever made. And in this video, I want to talk about what I've done in the last year, how I've changed my approach to life, to habits, to setting goals, and maybe some of the stuff is stuff that you could apply to if you theorize that you might have ADHD or you know that you have ADHD. So like I said, it's only been 1 year. 1 year ago today, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And before that, I had always sort of hypothesized that something was I wasn't exactly neurotypical, right? I always had a really difficult time focusing. In school, I just couldn't focus, right? It wasn't until I got to college and found something that I was really passionate about that school was something that actually excited me, that I wanted to do the work, right? But like probably most students, growing up I had zero interest. And in fact, I experienced a high degree of shame, really, because it was so difficult for me to tune in, to focus, to do the work, and to get really even passing grades. It wasn't until I got to high school that my grades obviously I continued to pass. I was lucky enough never to have to repeat a grade or anything like that. But I was a C/D student. That's just how it was until I got to high school, where I started to find some degree of interest, some discipline really to do the work. And I became a bit more of a CB student at that point. But even then, it was a real struggle. It was a real grind. And certain things just didn't work for me almost at all. I mean, most math was damn near impossible to focus on. I guess everything else I did okay at, but there was just a lot of time spent in my head, zoning out, imagining, right? Fantasizing about something, a story, or I'm like flirting with somebody in my head or something like that. But doing the work itself was really difficult. And that sort of has continued to be a challenge for me in my life, in my adult life. And the way it's mostly manifested is a mind that works like 100 miles an hour. There's I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but there's a great ADHD psychologist that talks about how having ADHD is like having a Ferrari engine for a brain, but you have bicycle brakes, right? And so there's a million things happening, but you can't actually control any of it. You can't direct any of that energy. And so a lot of my adult life, sort of the way this manifested was, I would have a lot of ideas. I would have a lot of projects that would come to mind, whether it was some kind of entrepreneurial endeavor or a creative project, like building an album or writing a book. And I would, when I would have a lot of that energy and I would sort of allot myself free time, right? Time to quote unquote relax and pursue passion, then I would dabble with this stuff a little bit. But I would always sort of return to this mindset of like, this is not what I should be doing, right? This is not the task at hand. This is not the thing that I should be focused on, and thereby this is a waste of time. And so I would sort of exist in this space where I had a semblance of an idea of what the best use of my time was. So for most of the last 10 years, it's been like my entrepreneurial endeavor. So building a business, whatever the business was at the time. And so anything else, anything beyond that little lens of, oh, I'm building a business, was unacceptable to me. I wouldn't allow myself to really sit down and take the time and do it and be present in doing it. When I realized I had ADHD, when I started to research what the practices were and what people suggested, I realized that holding myself back from all of these projects, right, from setting all of these qualifications of what had to happen in order for me to be present with the project or really feel like that was the best use of my time, I was working against the way that my brain naturally worked, the way that my brain was programmed. I am not a person that does best with just one project. Maybe one project that's top of mind, right? One main focus. But the fact of the matter is, like, I experience the world, I gain feedback through creativity, through actually taking action and receiving the feedback myself. Of course, I can learn from reading and I can learn from observation, but the degree to which I am going to experience progress and growth, and I don't know if this is just ADHD, but for anything really, right? It's very easy to become locked in analysis paralysis and be like so obsessed with taking in information that alone sort of gives you this sense that you're doing something, that you're accomplishing something, even though you're not actually progressing. You're not actually gaining any of your own feedback data, right? And so basically, when I realized that I had ADHD and when I learned about this idea of the Ferrari brain and, maybe you can focus on a lot of different things. Maybe you do have the mental energy and the focus, or what's the word that I want? The attention, to be able to do all of these different things, at least to dabble in them, right? And so I learned, that I had ADHD right around the time that I was, right around the time that I made that video back in January, the 10 plus years of weed addiction video, right? And so there was a lot of things that sort of happened all at the same time. Number one, getting annoyed by the hair, but so number one was the acknowledgement that I had ADHD, right? The second one was a re-engagement in the commitment to try to quit smoking weed. Now that's something that I had wanted to do for a long, long time, right? And I've talked about that a lot in the last year. But like I said, there was a lot of things that happened. So in making that video, I experienced a much higher degree of motivation to push for that goal, right? To push for that goal of total sobriety. When I learned about ADHD, it sort of clicked with the weed thing and realizing that, okay, what I've been doing is sort of self-medicating, right? The cannabis allows me to sort of process my thoughts. Sorry, I'm misting the camera here, so I hope you're a plant. It made me, it was like numbing me to a place where I could actually think, right? I could process my emotions, I could process my thoughts. And and that's the reason that I continued to do it, even though I had all of this idea of like, man, this is exhausting me, this is demotivating me, this is sort of taking away from my capacity to leverage my full energy against things. And when I get high, like the desire to take action and to pursue goals, especially ones that have innate risk, right? That motivation was dashed. It was so hard for me to socialize with people. It was so hard for me to feel confident that I could approach situations. And sure, much of it, this is entirely in my own head, right? I get comments all the time on here that it's like, it's just you, I do all this work when I'm high. It's like, great, that's great. There is a different conversation going on in your mind, and more power to you. That's phenomenal. I'm happy to hear that. That wasn't the situation for me. I had really overcome a lot of the fear and the anxiety. I didn't really experience that anymore. And I've talked about that a little bit on this channel. Experiences that I went through in my late teens, early 20s that sort of shattered my capacity to experience like a deep sense of perception-based anxiety. But I still would avoid like real challenging social situations. If you know anything about building a business, there is a lot of reaching out and talking to people that has to come in doing that, inevitably. And so I would really avoid those kinds of things. I would book calls, I would cancel the calls, or I would reschedule them over and over until the person was just like, this guy's not professional, right? He doesn't give a fuck about actually, serving his clients or creating a good offer. And that's not true. I did, but I just didn't have the capacity to socially show up, because I was constantly, critiquing myself, or I was constantly like, oh God, creating some perception of fear that probably wasn't even conscious. It was probably just more subconscious that I would, think that way or visualize whatever it was that was going to happen. But when I discovered that I had ADHD and I was, really committed to sobriety again, right? More so than I've ever committed in my life. It all sort of fit together to this place where now I had the tools, right? I had an understanding of what I could do, which I'll talk about next. I had an understanding of what was happening to me, or what I had, right? What was my situation was internally. And then I was no longer really hurdled or held down, shall we say, by being high. And so what that manifested in is just constant action. It was the exact opposite experience of everything that I've lived through for the last few years, of the way that I would communicate with myself, right? So no longer did I hold myself back from doing things. No longer did I sort of set hurdles or limitations on what I should be doing with my time. Now, of course, there is a degree of push-pull to this. Like, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, awesome. Like, let me just do everything. Let me just try to do everything. I mean, the fact of the matter is there's still certain obligations that you have to meet, right? We live in a society where, you have to take care of yourself, right? Maybe eventually we'll get to some kind of communalist utopia where you don't actually have to do fucking anything, and all of your basic needs are met, right? Your food, your housing, your clothes, and you have even more resources to pursue passion and interest, and none of it is incumbent upon you to actually deliver a degree of value in exchange. But in the relationship that our world works right now, it doesn't matter what country you live in, right? There's no limit to this. You have to show up and do some degree of consistent action to receive compensation, right? You probably have a family that you have some degree of obligation to show up and meet those needs. Beyond that, if you are a person that has ADHD, or you suspect that you have ADHD, it might be worth it for you to start to document wherever there's something of interest that comes to your mind, and then where do you impose limitations upon yourself. Now, these limitations might not be as extreme as, like, I can't even touch this project until I have until this is my primary project, right? That might not be where you're at. What might be the challenge is, like, for example, you want to write a book, but you consistently, like, every time you have some space, or every time you have some hunch that you should take action on writing, a lot of that time is spent sort of mulling over details, or it's mulling over perfection. And this is another place where you are really allowing that sense of not totally unburdening yourself, unshackling yourself, to be fully present and take action, right? And so the thing that you need to do is start to notice that, right? Become aware of that experience. And it will get easier for you to start to work with it, right? You communicate with yourself in a different way. You start to tell yourself, hey, it's fine for me to just be present with this, to just try, right? Write a page, write 2 pages. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be coherent. Any art is like this, any kind of songwriting, even entrepreneurship, like starting a startup. A lot of it is just throwing a lot of shit at a piece of paper, and eventually you have a semblance of an offer, you have a semblance of an ideal client, right? A target market. And then you bring a more structured vehicle into the play, but after you've done the brainstorming, after you've taken the time and put the information on the paper. But for me, it was like all of these things, right? I wanted to build a computer. I've always wanted to get into auto mechanics. I've always wanted to pursue politics from a more actionable perspective. I've always wanted to explore more avenues of fitness, right? And while I've continued to dabble in these things over the years, I look back through my notes. Like, I have this folder on my Google Drive of all my works. I call it just creative works. And so it's like books and screenplays and songs. And it's like, the last time that I really committed to, like, making an album, for example, it's been a long time. I mean, it like 2016 or 2017 or something. I've had two particular novels in my mind for that amount of time as well. And in that time, in those 10 years, right, barely anything happened, barely any change happened, except for the last year. And the difference literally was just that I stopped policing myself. I mean, I made sure that I had time in my calendar to meet the obligations that I had for my business, right, for my clients. Obviously I'm scheduling, like I would try to make time for eating and exercise and all these things. But when it came to like, I have an idea for a song, right? Or I have an idea for what I want to write next in this book that I'm writing, I just fucking did it. I just did it. Like, there was, I don't know. You navigate these situations with multiple levels of complexity and your own personal implications, if that even makes any sense, right? So like, there's the allowing yourself to do it, right? Then there's like the perfectionism of doing it perfectly versus just getting information out. Then there's like the consistency aspect of it. But most of this for me had already, a lot of these skills I had built, frankly, doing a lot of things that I didn't really deeply want to do, right? A lot of the consistency of showing up and building. These are things that I learned through business that, I wasn't always 100% passionate about what I was doing over the last 10 years. And that's another thing that I'll make another video about, because that's a huge thing that's changed for me just in the last couple months. But originally it was just that acceptance that maybe I am able to focus on all these things. Like maybe my brain just is able to process all of this information, and that's not something I should be trying to like hold back from, right? Maybe I've been limiting myself by trying to operate through the lens of somebody else's life, right? Somebody else's advice on focus and attention and work ethic. This wasn't advice that was made for me, right? And so as I've started to listen to people that do have ADHD, especially psychologists that work in this space, I've realized that was what was missing, was the allowance of my creativity to thrive, to be unshackled, right? And so like I said, since then I've written a lot more songs. I've grinded out a huge amount of 2 of these books that I'm writing. I did a whole bunch of stuff with building a computer and figuring that all out. Getting into like the deeper programming of that kind of thing. Like I always told myself I wasn't gonna play games, and I definitely wasn't gonna get into mods because it's like, oh God, it's so complicated. But it's like, if you're interested in something, right? Like, isn't that what life is about? Just doing things that make you feel good, that are interesting, that excite your sense of passion for this life. And so I just started doing it, Same thing with my car. I would never have done the kinds of repairs that I've recently done on my car. Because I would just be like, well, I don't know shit about cars. Yeah, but guess what, man? You can learn. You can look things up. You got YouTube University. AI is nuts in terms of like what you can take a picture of and it will just tell you what to do. I fixed my water heater that way. Like, that's another big one. Like this house, right? All the time and energy that has gone into, working on this house. I don't know if that's something that I would have ever attacked so, voraciously in the past. I'm working on a political campaign right now for a congressman that I literally I'm only in this position because I started showing up to the local Dems meetings. Whatever. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not really in love with Democrats, but I figured I had to do something. And I met this guy who's running for Congress, and he's a cool ass dude, great guitarist. He's a union man, veteran, and he shares all my, my values as a leftist. And again, this just never would have happened if I had, policed myself and been like, oh, you can't go to these 6 o'clock meetings. Like, this is going to turn into a whole other obligation, and it's going to take away from the other things that you're doing. And it's like, yeah, but what if the other things that you're doing aren't, like, they're not, that's not your destiny, right? What if destiny is just on the other side of following your passion, right? And so I've really had one of the most incredible years of my life, and it's been very, very stressful at times. Right now, it's insanely stressful, right? There's 3 massive things going on, 1 good, but time consuming, 2 pretty bad, and also very time consuming. But I guess I don't, like, I'm not too worried because the amount of change that I've undergone in the last year has felt so good, right? It's felt so empowering and so revolutionary for what I think I can create in my life. And I would say that the catalyst, I mean, there's 2 catalysts. You guys know what I've been talking about on this channel. And in fact, I'm thinking about making some disclaimers and stuff to kind of, I don't know, shrug off a lot of the potential legal ramifications. But, the other big catalyst was just acknowledging that, yeah, I have attention deficit hyperactive disorder. But it's not a disorder, to be honest. Like, so far, it's a superpower. And so, if I could leave you guys with anything, it would just be take the limiter off. Take it off. Cars, a lot of old cars have like speed limiters where you can't drive over a certain speed. And it's like, dude, if you can control the car, why the fuck are you driving so slowly? And I think that's what I realized about myself was like, I was constantly being fed these narratives about focusing on one thing and not, never have your eggs in too many baskets and all these things. And it's like, dog, I don't really, right? Like, writing a novel is not like one of those things that I'm like, I am hedging my future on this, like becoming a novelist, right? If anything, I'm hedging my future on being an effective entrepreneur that actually profits. But even if I don't want to, even if I'm not, it's not super important for me to become the next Stephen King or even really to get published. Come on. It's not about that. It's about allowing my mind to follow the track that my intuition lays out, and this is what I hope more people can be willing to do, whether it's ADHD or not. I'm just speaking through the lens of something that I've learned about myself. And obviously you're probably watching this video because you either suspect or that you have ADHD and you're looking for solutions, right? But really for anybody, I don't think that holding your intuition back over the long term is good for you in any way, right? There's no real good that could come out of that because it's going to be a constant stressor, right? You are living in a reality that has been laid out for somebody else, not you. And that's what I had been feeling like most of my life was like, man, I feel like I have so much potential. There's so many things that I can do and offer and build. And yet the process that's being laid out for me is like this rigid, focus on one thing, stay disciplined, never deviate. When you have free time, maybe you can think about it, but don't get too serious about it. And that's just not the way that our brains work, right? Our brains are, committed to absorbing as much information as possible and experiencing really as much as possible. And so I'm going to leave it at that. I hope that was coherent enough. And that's my advice, is try everything, do everything, right? Maintain the structures of progress for the things that you need to stick to in terms of your obligations. But beyond that, stop limiting yourself, stop holding yourself back. And you might just find that this Ferrari brain of yours yields you some insane results and just some incredible transformation. And you'll thank yourself. And maybe you'll thank me for making this video. Anyway, much love, my friends. I hope this was helpful. If you have any comments, drop a comment below. If you want to send me an email, my email is below as well. And peace. Much love. Namaste. And I'll talk to you later.